But I did want to say that this thing got started from a few different sources, and the first way that it got started, for me anyway, was I read this book called The Oxford Project. Has anybody seen this by chance? You know, it's not widely popular, but it's really worth checking out. It's a wonderful, wonderful book by Peter Feldstein and Stephen Bloom down in Iowa. And what they did is they took a look at a town of 700 people, Oxford, Iowa. And Peter Feldstein photographed basically everybody there and every resident 25 years ago and today. And then they did interviews with these residents as well. And it's just a stunningly beautiful book. And I read that book, and really that was in 2010. I immediately called John and said, hey, you know, I think we could do a project like this at the Wagon Wheel. It's sort of its own community. We could have photographs, we could have stories, and so forth. And John, he listened to me.
Well, you know, my day job is at the Mankato Free Press, and so, you know, you get kind of an odd schedule there, and of course with my duties up at MSU. So I'll admit that I was a little bit measured in my response, I think. But then the more I thought about it, and Dave has done some wonderful things with his some of his online work. What was it?
Voices from the Valley.
Voices from the Valley. And, you know, he did some really very nice things, so I thought I'd like to be part of the project. And when we started, I didn't really realize it was going to stretch over 2.5 years.
Yeah.
But it was like building a brick house. You do it one brick at a time. And you know, it was something I was glad I got started in.
Yeah, and part of it, for me, too, had a little bit to do, and it's nice that we're here at the Front Street exhibit. I mean, I had been sort of poking around Front Street, and Jessica Potter and I had an interest. She helped me develop some interest in Front Street. But, you know, in some ways I think the Wagon Wheel, I'm not from here, but in some ways it seems like the Wagon Wheel is one of the last things left of Old Front Street. In a certain set of stories and a certain lifestyle, if you will, I think of Front Street still exists in the Wagon Wheel. So part of it was to capture one of the last remaining places of Mankato's Front Street as it once was. And then we'll talk more about this later, but for me as an academic, I was very interested in this concept of third place. And there's a book by a sociologist named Ray Oldenburg about these concepts of third places, places between home and work where people gather and form community and interact in unique ways. And we'll talk more about that a little bit tonight. But for me, a big part really was the Front Street connection, the Oxford connection, and thinking that maybe John would go along with this. I've been a fan of his work for some time. So we wanted to talk a little bit tonight. Any questions or comments or insights, if there ever are, just throw them out. And we'll make this interactive as we go too. But we did want to talk a little bit about the process. I include here John's best photograph that he took for the entire project. That's a joke. I'm so glad he snapped that one, though, kind of a random shot. And that's me interviewing somebody in the book named Dave Botten. And if you look carefully, you can actually see a recorder sitting there. Sometimes I use the mic, sometimes no. But I did want to mention, so basically what we did, and the people at the Wagon Wheel were so helpful, especially the waitresses, Rebel Miller, who's no longer there, Alyssa Haney-White. They would identify people for us that they thought were unique characters that were really a part of the place and that frankly might allow us to interview them. We originally wanted to interview every single regular of the Wagon Wheel Cafe. But that's kind of hard. There are probably over 100 of them, and we just couldn't do that. But we did interview over 50 of them. And we would sit almost always just like this in a booth at the Wagon Wheel Cafe, and we would talk. And I had no prepared questions. Well, that's not true. I had about 2 or 3. I would say, what do you like about this place? What do you feel like when you walk in the door? And tell me about yourself. And that was it. And then we just talk. And really unique things would come up. So that was a big part of the process. And then those interviews would they'd be taken and they'd be transcribed and they'd be turned into probably 15, 20-page documents. Then we would try to get those down to maybe a 500-word story. And what I would do then is I would get in touch with John. Maybe you want to pick it up from here. You'd always get an email from me.
Yeah, I have lots of emails from Dave.
That's true.
That's 2.5 years. But basically, the approach we thought we'd try to use in all this was to shoot some kind of a photograph of the Wagon Wheel and whatever, these people interacting with their friends and with the employees there. And then I would make some kind of arrangement to shoot some kind of a portrait of them in some kind of environment. And Dave and I would touch bases and talk about what the significant parts of the interview were. And I think it worked out fairly well. When you read the copy and you see the photographs, you see that they will frequently dovetail rather nicely. But it was kind of remarkable being these people that were participating were more than happy to invite me into their home. Sometimes with a little bit of coaxing, but when the dust finally settled, I think the most interesting thing about any photograph is the interaction between the photographer and the subject. And I think that was probably one of the things I brought away from this whole project was getting to really sit down and talk to these people.
Yeah, for me, because I talked for about an hour, and it was very interesting. Most people would share a great deal of their life. I'm sure there were things that they left off the table, but and if you have been kind enough to pick up the book, you've seen some of these. People would talk about losing a daughter at the age of 16 and how the wagon wheel helped bring some solace, or people would talk about the aging process, or Royal Lee here, who I actually interviewed Royal in his home. One of the things about the wagon wheel, if you've been there, you can't hear in the wagon wheel. You can't see in the wagon wheel. So Royal, I wanted to interview at his home, but he launched into about an hour plus story about being a prisoner of war in World War II. And it was very gratifying for me, as a person, to be able to hear these stories and then try to, in some way, represent them fairly in 500-600 words, right? And that's where we would go. Is we for about I knew that was going to happen. For about a year and a half. This was doing this before. We'll see if I can get this. But for about a year and a half, the stories were published in the Mankato Free Press. Some of you saw them. There they are. And so they would come out individually. Throughout time. That was very gratifying. The response was very gratifying. People enjoyed being in the paper. There were people down at the wagon wheel that were, laminating these things and keeping the stories. And should I tell my story about the person who maybe I shouldn't? Remember the response from the one person? Oh, my favorite. We got so many responses, and of course, not everybody loves what you try to do artistically and such. And we get so many nice responses. I think, but my favorite one, the one I remember the most, is a woman in the wagon wheel who said, yes. She came up to me and said, I read all of the stories. And she said, some of them are okay. And then I kind of thought, I guess I was getting used to getting complimented, although critique is more than fine. Some of them, so I kind of thought okay was going to move upward, but we published them in the Free Press for some time with John's photos, with the text. And I think we published about 30 of them that were in the book, and then the book contains more. Any comments about the process at all? Or?
Well, when we started this whole project, one of the things for me was I knew it was going to have to be sandwiched in with my regular duties at Free Press too. So one of the things that I thought was important was that somehow we were able to share these efforts in the Free Press. It sort of legitimized the effort for me to be able to get it published in the Free Press, and I think they were very well received. That's a nice comments.
Yeah, it was remarkable for me as an academic. If I do write things, not many people read them, as a general rule, and it was really interesting to hear how these impacted people's lives, or you get emails from people, or thousands and thousands of people. I don't know what the subscription base for the Free Press is.
No, not what it once was, but
yeah. And some of the people in the stories had interesting responses, getting notes from old students of theirs, if they happened to be a teacher who saw them, and frankly, I think in some cases weren't sure if the individual was still with us or not. Hey, wait a second, and would send a note, and really some nice things happened from the paper as well. The last thing we'll talk about in this format, before we kind of open it up we'll talk about some photos as well. But I wanted to share a little bit about this idea of the third place, because just as John had to connect this to his job at the Free Press, I had to connect it to mine as a communication studies professor. And there's a sociological theory out there about third places. by a guy named Ray Oldenburg, as I mentioned. And Ray Oldenburg, his work gets critiqued at times for a variety of reasons as well, and fairly so. But basically, Ray Oldenburg says, we have three areas in our life, right? We have our home, our domestic space, and we have our work life. And communities, in order to thrive, need this third place, this place between home and work, where people can form community, where people can celebrate community, where people can feel at home, where people can feel comfortable with one another. And perhaps some of you have those kinds of places. I mean, they can be in any number of places, but the Wagon Wheel is kind of a classic example of this. That place between home and work where people go together, form community, celebrate community, and frankly, just interact with one another away from it all. All right? So the third place was a big part of the book. If you've seen the book, there's quotations from Oldenburg throughout, but it was also the spirit of the project and how I looked at the narratives. Third places can be places like coffee shops, taverns, hardware stores even, restaurants, barber shops, etc. But there are always places where people come together to converse. So, Menards probably is not a third place. I did a project a while back on Much Hardware, which of course David and Sandy just retired, and good for them. But that was, I think, a third place, right? People went in there for hardware. But they also went in to talk about the twins. They also went in to talk about all kinds of things. Much more so than maybe you have it. Nothing wrong with Menards, but a different kind of deal.
Say the Historical Society.
The Historical Society.
For all you fabulous volunteers.
There you go. The Historical Society, I think, could fall into that as well. So there's all this writing and different ideas about these kind of places. And what Oldenburg did was he talked about how really, for an ideal third place, there should be 8 characteristics. Okay? And first of all, the third place is on neutral ground. So this place between home and work is on neutral ground. In other words, everybody can go there. So a country club, nothing wrong with a country club, but it's not a third place because everybody can't go there. A church is in many ways not what he would talk about as a third place because typically people divide themselves up by denomination. Wonderful community places, I'm not suggesting that, but a neutral place where anybody can go. And the Wagon Wheel is a classic example of that, obviously even its location. But I teach this to students on occasion, and it's a little, now there's people are there virtual third places, all of this, but sometimes people say, well, my house, I invite a lot of people over to my house, and on Friday nights we do these gatherings. And that's great, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not a neutral place. A person off the street can't come into your house. Otherwise, it would be a problem, right? So it has to be neutral in that basically, within reason, everybody can get there. Again, this is an ideal, right? The third place, ideally, is a leveler. I doubt that this ever works perfectly. But what Oldenburg means by this is that ideally, social distinctions are leveled. Social class distinctions are leveled. In the Wagon Wheel, you heard this a lot. There'd be a person who would be struggling to make ends meet, maybe battling depression and anxiety, not able to work because of that, and there would be a judge sitting. And they're from different worlds in this town, but they would be in the same place, and sometimes they would interact with one another. Over and over in the book, you have people saying, you got the richest people in town, you got the poorest people in town, and so forth. Now, I'm not sure that any place ever levels perfectly. You know what I mean? And that everybody all of a sudden becomes equal. But the idea is that social distinctions matter less in these places. Doesn't matter what you do for a living. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. Frankly, what matters is your ability to crack a joke and keep a conversation going. Ideally. Conversation is the main activity. Yes, people go to eat or get hardware, but they go to converse. They go to talk. They go in some ways to alleviate loneliness, frankly. I remember Kurt Vonnegut, the wonderful writer, who said he could, put all the world's problems into one word, loneliness. I have no idea if that's true. It was a good line. But, it's true that people go in there to talk. And they're going to have some interaction. Sometimes even to listen to other people talk. There was a gentleman in the book, Dennis Benz, I think it might be my favorite narrative, very nice man. And he talked about being pretty shy and things, but he actually liked to go on the Wagon Wheel and kind of participated by more listening. to the interactions that were going on, and he felt part of it that way. Third place is accessible and accommodating. Basically, a third place tries to let as many people in as possible. And even though the Wagon Wheel is an interesting place that way, and where I feel bad that I'm talking. This was the part I was supposed to talk a lot about. I'm not like the guy who won't stop talking. But it's true. Even like the Wagon Wheel is not, the most accessible place for people in wheelchairs, for example, and then it's hard to get in, the door is hard to get in, the bathroom's hard to use. And yet, you will go to the Wagon Wheel, and there's a couple of individuals in chairs in the book, and the Wagon Wheel will be there, and they'll literally be helping individuals drink their soda. Waitresses will come over and help with that. I mean, they're very accessible, very accommodating. And they're also open a lot, even though they don't stay open in the evenings anymore. So accessible and accommodating. Third places have regulars. They have regulars, people who almost become the cast of characters that make the place. And of course, that's what this book, everybody that we interviewed was a regular. We didn't try to interview anybody who just dropped in once or twice a year. These are people who integrate themselves and their lives into the Wagon Wheel. A classic example of a third place is Cheers, the TV show Cheers, right? Because you got your regulars, and you also got your regulars like you've got Cliff, the mailman, and Fraser, the psychiatrist, and they just interact and banter that back and forth. That doesn't always happen in real life. Like a lot of times the psychiatrist or the academic hang out at this bar, and other people hang out at this bar, and so forth, right? They did that. So you've got a group of regulars at a third place. People at Wagon Wheel 2-3 times a day, they go to the Wagon Wheel. And they are there, and they've been regulars forever. Most of the time, Oldenburg said, third places have a low profile. And that they're not fancy places. In part, this makes them accessible across so many different social groups. Like I come from a very blue-collar family. My parents weren't ever comfortable in a fancy restaurant. They weren't comfortable. They felt out of place there. In fact, oddly enough, they weren't comfortable when they would come visit me when I lived in different places. Any hotel that they didn't feel comfortable pulling their cooler in, they wouldn't go to. Okay? So, but anyway, often a low profile. They don't, and Oldenburg says a lot of times they don't meet these sort of professional middle class standards of cleanliness, of perfection. Nothing wrong with Applebee's. I'm not here to pick on Applebee's, but it's kind of perfect, right? Like everything's perfectly clean. The child seat, like I always joke, I could put my kid in the seat and shoot the kid to the moon, and they wouldn't be hurt, because it meets every federal regulation. You go to the Wagon Wheel, they got the same booster seat that's been there since 1950, I'm pretty sure, right? And so forth. So a low profile, not dirty, not clean, but not phony, lived in, I guess, like an old shoe, as somebody once called it, right? The mood is playful in a third place. There's only one more of these left, by the way. But the mood is playful. People joke. And actually, Oldenburg talks about this, and I like this idea. We quote this in the book, but that a lot of times his argument is, he's kind of snippy as a writer. But his argument is that we're so phony polite to one another a lot. Like you go to some places and people are trained to interact in a certain way. And I understand that, because it must get frustrating to be a manager of those places and watch, But he argues there's so much fake politeness that in third places, often what you get are people picking on one another. And boy, do you. I mean, joke after joke after joke about, and nothing seems off limits. I remember back to the Bull Shippers Coffee Group, and somebody said, yeah, you should talk to Royal Lee. And somebody said, yeah, he was a prisoner of war. And somebody else said, yeah, that's why he's got so much gray hair. So, they were joking about being a prisoner of war, right? Or just yesterday, Jerry, who's featured in the book, gentleman in a wheelchair, is teaching a class, and I said, hey, yeah, maybe Kevin, because he wants me to come to his class. I said, yeah, I'll be there. I said, Kevin, you should come along. What the hell can Jerry teach me, And Jerry laughs, and everybody, they're picking on each other, but in a nice way. And then finally, the third place is a home away from home for many people. People think of it as a home away from home.